What's up, everybody? Welcome to our first Alpha on Outreach training session. It's an honor to be with you. I'm really excited about this. I believe that Alpha is going to enrich your upcoming outreach, not change it. It's not my desire. It's not my desire is that this would change your outreach. I still want you to go on to outreach and do whatever God's speaking for you to do. But my prayer is that this would strengthen your upcoming outreach. I think back to all the outreaches I've done, and I'm like, if only I had Alpha. And so, but before we get going, let me hear from you. How many of you have heard of Alpha? Okay, a few of you. Great. If you've never heard of Alpha, Alpha describes himself as a tool. They would define themselves as a series of sessions that explore the Christian faith. So what does that mean? If I were to put it in my own words, they're a simple model to help seekers or non-believers not only come to know Jesus, but also come into community and ultimately see fruit that remains. So, but before we dive into all that, I want to give you a bit about me and why I'm here teaching you, to give you some context of why Alpha and why I think this will really bless your outreach. So my name is Dan Shannon. I live here in Kona, Hawaii with my wife and 3 kids. I originally came here in 2001 to do a discipleship training school with YWAM, so just like you guys. I was in a season of my life where I was, trying to figure out God, and I was trying to figure out what do I do with my life. So you might be able to relate to that. I came into YWAM, and I tell people it was, like I met a new God. I always believed in God, all growing up, but I found like I met a God that was not just a God of the Bible, but a God of today. Like I was awakened to this new reality, and it stirred something inside of me. And so I ended up coming back onto staff with YWAM, and I became kind of your quintessential YWAMer. So I started staffing DTSs and leading DTSs all over the place, whether it was to Cambodia or Thailand or Rome or Nepal. And then I co-led DTS, and then I led DTS. And then eventually I did the School of Biblical Studies, which launched me into teaching as a young person. So it was like my early 20s. I just started, it's all relational in YWAM. So I got an invitation to go speak at my first DTS down in the Cook Islands. And then one thing led to another, and I started going to other DTSs. I was kind of this rare commodity. I was like the only young guy that wanted to teach on the fear of the Lord. And so I started traveling all over the world, and it was during this like 3-year period. I probably taught in nearly 35 or 40 countries in 3 years. So I was on the road all the time. But it was during this season that God began doing something in my heart that, kind of preparing me for what I'm doing right now, working with YWAM and Alpha together. And let me explain that a little bit. So on any given week, I would, find myself in a new country. So, I would fly down to, let's say, Vanuatu. I'd land on one island. I would take another little plane to another island, and then I would take a boat to another remote island, and I would teach in a DTS there. And that would be in like grass huts and primarily with local Nivans. A few weeks later, I'd find myself flying to Egypt, and I'd land in Cairo. I remember the first time I landed in Cairo. It was at their old airport, and there was this man standing there. It was like 1 a.m. when I got out, and he had this sign, and it just said, Mr. Dan. And so I remember thinking to myself, I think that's probably me. Like, I'm Mr. Dan. So I went up to the guy, and he only spoke Arabic. And I was like, Mr. Dan? He's like, yes, Mr. Dan. And I was like, all right. So I jumped in a taxi with him. Well, 30 minutes later, as we're driving into the desert, I started to get a little nervous. Like, what if there was another Mr. Dan? But luckily, it was a guy from YWAM, and I went and taught in a DTS there, which was full of Egyptian and Sudanese students. But as you can see, like, I got to see the breadth and diversity of YWAM all over the world. I would go to small DTSs, big DTSs, ones that had very few staff, to having a ton of staff. And there were two threads that stood out to me that were really highlighted to this, or during this season. The first one was this, that God uses YWAM, and that God is faithful to any group that comes together and tries to seek Him. We see that theme throughout Scripture. Draw near to me, and I will draw near to you. If you seek me, you will find me. And I honestly, I think that's the secret of YWAM, because we are the most unorganized group probably on earth. And we don't have money, we're young, oftentimes we don't have like seminary training, but God uses it, right? And I really think it's because God's like, yeah, if you seek me, you'll find me, regardless of those things. So that was a positive thread. But the other thread that I noticed was not as encouraging. And it was this. There was this common conversation as I went around the world of how can we see more fruit that remains? On our outreaches, with our students and staff that come to YWAM and go back home, there was this constant thing of like, yeah, we need to do better with that. And that challenged me. It left this like question in my heart of how do we, not only bring people to the Lord, but how do we make disciples? Like, how do we not just make believers? How do we make followers? And that question just stood out to me. It was like this, like it became this new lens in my life that I couldn't get rid of that question. And so, anyway, that being said, I actually asked Lauren and Darlene, I had the privilege of interviewing them a handful of months ago about this. And we talked about this question. And I want to show you a clip from that.
It was 1964. We had 220 young people that going from village to village, island to island in the Caribbean. And we had thousands that made commitments to Christ. We had everything, Bibles, we had literature and so on. And I went back the next year to just follow up. So many of them that had given their names and everything, and we could have won them again. And I've seen this so many places in the world, that they need something more that takes them deeper in understanding, deeper in the Word, and deeper in their mother tongue.
So as you guys can see, even our founders in YWAM have wrestled through this question. And I remember the first time I was really confronted with this question of how do we make disciples, not just believers. And it was on an outreach up in South Asia in the Himalayas. And I was with this team, and we went to this area where we knew the people group that very few of them had ever come to know Jesus. And so while we're there, we just started hanging out with them. We'd go play basketball with them. We'd go invite them to meals. And there was this one guy, we'll call him Jimmy. And Jimmy just loved us. He loved playing basketball. He loved coming over to our house and just hanging out. And it was a team of primarily guys. And so he loved joking with us. But he noticed there was something different about us. And he started asking questions, which we were thrilled about, specifically about our faith. And so on his own accord, he asked more and more questions until on his own, he came to know Jesus. Now, this in our eyes was like best case scenario. Oh my gosh, like one of these guys from this people group, he's just come to the Lord. So as all short-term outreaches do, it came to an end. And so we said goodbye to Jimmy. Now, we actually did a pretty good job of staying in touch with him. We stayed in touch via Facebook. We actually came back and visited him. My best friend actually went and visited him like 2 years later. And unfortunately, we noticed that Jimmy slowly became less and less interested in Jesus and then eventually walked away. And you guys, this just left this question. Again, it emphasized that question of, gosh, how do we keep them going? And I realized, I was like, I know how to bring somebody to where I was in my faith the first 18 years of my life, like when I was a believer, but I really don't know how to bring them to where, I was then and now, where I was actively following Jesus. And so again, how do we make and sustain disciples on outreach? I want to take a time out right now, and I want to ask you guys that question, just to discuss it with the person next to you. Like, what are some ways you think that we can make disciples or be better at doing that while you're on outreach? Okay, so tell me, what did you guys talk about? Like, how can we do better at leaving fruit that remains and making disciples, not just converts? Yeah.
We talked about a few things in our group, but I think one thing that I feel like is so important is to see them put into Christian community. That they have people that have similar faith, same faith,
Yep.
and read the Bible together, worship together, pray together on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and Jimmy, for example, we just led him to the Lord on his own. He had nobody. So it's good. What else?
I'll share. The biggest thing that I was saying was that I want to recognize like people's culture and the key components of that. And so depending on where you are on outreach, really taking time to focus on the things that really bring people together. Is it actually food, or is it something else? And, maybe they really reflect on, there's someone that's in their culture that they really focus on, and inviting maybe specifically that person, finding those key people or those key components of culture that really bring people together.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so trying to harness culture and look at the benefits, and also maybe the things that might be barriers, and be aware of that. It's good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think some things that stood out in our conversation is just really making sure we're putting Bibles in people's hands, so they have something to go back to after we've left, as well as just really being intentional about how consistent we're being. It's not just about getting a ton of people saved on our outreaches, but meeting with those same people, week in and week out on a consistent level. I think that has really been successful in our
It's good.
areas.
Yeah, it's like teaching them not just about God, but going, hey, this is how you follow him.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's huge. Great. All right, so let's keep moving forward. So this question just continued to stand out to me in my life. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that, where you just can't get away from this, this question that you're trying to figure out, but you don't have the answer to. And so, I went through this season where I was talking to God, going, God, how can we see more fruit that remains? How can we make disciples? And I felt like God just kept highlighting this one word to me. I don't know if you have ever had that, where just like a word just keeps coming at every corner. So the word for me was church. But that didn't answer that question, for me at the time. My conversation with God would be like, so God, like, how do we make disciples? How do we see fruit that remains? And I'd feel like he would say church. And I'd be like, church is cool, God. Yep, love it. But no. Like, so my question is this: how do we see fruit that remains? Like disciples, right? And again, church would come around the corner at me somehow. And I'd be like, yep, church is cool, love church. No. So and so I would just go back and forth with God. And it wasn't until I was teaching up in Davos, Switzerland at a snowboarders DTS with my wife. Kind of rough, right? And a good friend of mine, Dan Bauman, he was teaching the week before us. And Dan has this aunt, Aunt Loti. And Aunt Loti lives in Zurich. And Dan said, hey, why don't we go stay at her house during the weekend in between our teaching times and hang out? So we ended up doing that. And Dan and I stayed up late one night just talking about this stuff, going, man, how can we see more fruit that remains in YWAM? How can we see, on our outreaches? And Dan brought up this man to me, and he said, well, have you ever heard of Floyd McClung? And I was like, well, yeah, I've heard of Floyd. in YWAM, you know, I feel like you hear about this guy, Floyd. You don't see him, but you see his books everywhere. He's like this enigma. But come to find out, Floyd was the first international director of YWAM for 8 years. He was one of the early pioneers in YWAM. And his parents happened to be in Dan, not me, Dan, my friend Dan's DTS. And so my friend Dan, he said, hey, you know, Floyd was asking a lot of similar questions to you, you know, or as you should maybe go spend some time with him. And I was like, really? Where does he live? And he said, oh, he lives in South Africa, and they're completely focused on church planning. And I was like, huh, interesting. So my wife and I took that and we prayed about it, and we felt peace about it. So I wrote Floyd, and I found his email, found out he was alive and real. And I wrote him, and I was like, hey, Floyd, you know, we feel like God keeps speaking this word church to us. Can we come spend some time with you? And he was like, well, if you can get here by February 5th, which was in 2 months, and by the way, we had just been married 2 months before, but he said, if you can make it here by February 5th, we have this church planning kind of internship experience that we run, and we'd love to have you. So my wife and I, we prayed about it, and we felt peace to go to South Africa. So we did a complete 180 in our life, and we moved to South Africa following this word church, which really didn't make sense to us at the time, but we were pretty confident God was highlighting this word. So we get to South Africa, and we sat down the first day. It was kind of like a DTS class setting. So half the students were African, and half were Western. And we sat down, and Floyd and his wife Sally came to share. And so Floyd comes up, and Floyd's like 6'6". He's so tall, and he comes up, and he's got this big smile. We call him Papa Floyd. And you know, he came up and he began to share, and he shared all about their early years in YWAM and how they pioneered the YWAM work in Afghanistan, in Kabul. They actually started this kind of guest house called the Dilaram House that they would take in drugged out hippies, and then if they were interested in Jesus, they would bring them to what was kind of like a YWAM base on the outskirts of town and disciple them. And he shared how eventually they prayed and they felt led to move from Afghanistan to Amsterdam in the red light district. So right in the midst of prostitutes, drug dealers, you know, gangs, and they started a YWAM base right there, and running DTSs and schools. And he began to share how they started asking this question as well: how can we see more fruit that remains? And specifically while they were in Amsterdam, they led, you know, they were seeing people come to the Lord. So, you know, and these types of people, prostitutes, drug dealers, gang members, and they were trying to fit them into churches, but it was tricky because a lot of times the churches didn't know what to do with them. And so they thought, well, let's just start our own little simple churches, I guess. And so they would take the fruit and they would begin to teach them how to meet together, how to have fellowship together, how to read the Bible together, and really follow Jesus together. And Floyd shared and he said, man, and we began to see fruit that lasted, disciples. And not only just a disciple, but disciples that made disciples. As a matter of fact, some of those groups, this was back in the 70s, some of those groups are still going today and have become even traditional churches, which is incredible, right? And Floyd shared, he said, you know, for years and years, I've asked myself, what is church? In other words, what are the ingredients for church? And he said, I wasn't asking this to be critical of churches, like, oh, that's not a church or that is. No, he said, I was asking this because I wanted to know, how do I bring church to people who don't have it or have access to it? And so he said, one of the first things that stood out to me as I searched scripture was this. He said, as I looked through Jesus' teachings, I noticed Jesus never gave a model for church. He never said, hey, church has to be like this, or you know, it has to be in a building, or you have to have a podium, or you have to have a worship leader, or you have to go to seminary, right? But he said this, he said, it's almost though like Jesus showed what the product of church should create. Like he didn't say you have to do this in order to get to that product. He allowed flexibility and room there. One of the ways I like to explain this is like in a math equation. It's almost like Jesus emphasized the number 3, but he never said 2 plus 1 is the way to get to 3. Why? Because 12 divided by 4 equals 3. 1.5 plus 1.5 equals 3. You know, what else equals 3? 30 divided by 10 equals 3. You know, there's so many different ways. But how often do we get stuck on that? Like, this is the way, right? And we forget, like, okay, that's not the what matters here. What matters is it creating followers of Jesus, disciples, right? And Floyd shared, he said, you know, if I were to give my simplest definition of church, he said, it comes from boiling down all of Jesus' teachings. Like if we were to take all of Jesus' teachings and put it in a pot, he said, I think 3 things would remain. Love God, love each other, and love those around you who don't know God, or love your neighbor, right? And he said, my simplest definition for church is this: one group of people that are committed to everyone participating in those 3 things. So don't hear what I'm not saying. Not one group of people that has some people that are loving God really well or doing worship, some who are on the missions team, right? And some who are really good at community. No, he said one group of people where everyone is doing that. And he said when one group of people does that, he said something happens. And those words caught me. That caught my attention. And I thought to myself, I was like, all right, have I ever had one group of people that I've practiced those 3 loves with? And I thought to myself, and I thought back all growing up in my church experience, and I thought, well, in that church we were really good at loving each other, or loving God and loving each other. At that church, you know, we were good at loving, you know, God and doing missions, but we didn't have that much community. I thought through, and I fast forwarded in my life all the way up to my DTS. And I thought, all right, we had like 55 students that came from all over the world. We were all there to try and love God. Keyword try. You know, we were all trying to figure out like who God is and how to follow him. We were all trying to love one another. We lived together. We ate together. We paid for each other's outreaches, you know. We prayed. And then, you know, we went on outreach together. We were trying to share the things that we were receiving. And I thought to myself, I can't deny that when I had one group of people that were doing those 3 things, something did happen, just like Floyd said. And so immediately I thought to myself, all right, mister, like, if you can show me how to give those 3 loves to people, like on outreach, without making them do a DTS, I'm all in. I'm all in, because to me, that's a win. Not because I don't like DTS or YWAM or other programs, it's just that DTS isn't meant to be long-term, right? So please don't hear what I'm not saying. YWAM and DTS are not meant to be your church. They're, if anything, I would kind of frame it like this. It's almost, I would propose that oftentimes when we come into YWAM or DTS, it's like we have one of the best tastes of church that we've ever experienced. But again, it's short-term and not meant to be forever, right? So I want to take another time out right now, and I want to ask you guys, have you ever had a group in your life that you have practiced all 3 of those loves together? And if so, how did that affect you? All right, go. All right, so do any of you have feedback on that? Like, have you ever experienced, you know, maybe a community where you've had a couple of those loves or all of them?
Yeah, I was a part of one where we were really in, like, we love each other, we love God, but the part of loving the lost, we did it, like, it was kind of missing out.
Yeah.
You will see, like, we were so hungry for God, we just partnered with each other and going for it. But when all the time when it come to, all right, let's love the lost, it was that part that was missing a lot.
Yep.
And that brought me questions like, okay, well, we're doing all this together, but the main goal is not doing it. And I was like, we missing the part. Right?
Yeah.
We need to love
Yeah.
each other. We need to go for the lost. We need to go out there and be with all of them. But that little, I think that little piece, it was missing out.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, I've asked this question to a lot of different groups, and that's the one that if there was one missing, it was loving those who don't know, right? Like a lot of people have been a part of churches or communities that are really good at loving God, loving each other, but that third one sometimes is missing. And I think one of the things I've come to find is that one is so critical in keeping us healthy, as healthy followers of Jesus. Like if we're not disciples that are making disciples, there's a huge piece there missing. And you could ask the question, who does it benefit more? Does it benefit the person that you're reaching out to or yourself? And I would say it's almost both because, for example, if I have a coworker, that is not following Jesus and I start praying with my community for that person. And I'm like, no, there's no chance this person's coming to know God. But we start praying for them and maybe 3 months go by and this person comes to me and maybe opens up and shows some hunger towards the Lord. Not only is that gonna, benefit them, but I'm going, oh my gosh, God, you're faithful. And you see God active in your own life. So you can see how it really helps health there. So let me go back to my story. So I'm there in Africa, and my wife and I are like, all right, show us how to give these 3 loves away, Floyd. And so for the next, 7 years, we came under Floyd, not only in Africa, or in South Africa, but also in Colorado. And he mentored us on how to give these 3 loves away. And we practiced what we called simple church planning. And so we used a bunch of different small models that just bring simple riverbanks to communities, like in living rooms or in, wherever they are, whether it's in maybe a shack in a township or in a village. It teaches people some simple steps on how not only to know God, but actually follow Him. And so we were like church planning scientists, I tell people. We were testing these and seeing what worked and what didn't work. We did it there in South Africa. We did it in India. We did it in Zanzibar, this island off the coast of Tanzania, and then ultimately with university students in Colorado. And man, you guys, our whole approach on evangelism and missions was just re-networked. And it was such a powerful time for us of learning, a lot through trial and error. But we saw enough fruit that remained that we thought, man, this is our heartbeat. We really want to continue with this. And then we thought to ourselves, you know what? This journey all began in YWAM. I wonder if we could bring this back into YWAM somehow. Teach YWAMers like yourself some of these principles we were learning so you could see more fruit that remained. And so we prayed about that and we felt the nudge to move back here to Kona. And so we did. And we started practicing with outreach teams, with people going home. And again, we started to see some really cool fruit. Now, this leads me to what we're talking about, Alpha. So I had this buddy of mine, his name's Trent. And Trent had worked for Alpha for 14 years. And he was also a YWAMer. And he came to me and he's like, hey, I heard what you guys are doing. It's awesome. But have you ever considered using Alpha, like the model or the tool of Alpha? And to be honest, when he said that, I was like, Alpha? You mean that thing my church uses back home? And I was like, no, I haven't used that. And he said, well, you should maybe consider it. They're doing some pretty cool things around the world. I trust this guy and respect him a lot. And so I thought, all right, cool. I'll look into it. So I went home and I went onto my computer and I looked up Alpha course, right? And I went on and I was like, all right, Alpha. And I was like, whoa, they're being used in over 150 nations around the world. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. I kept looking. I was like, wow, it's translated in over 100 languages. And then I kept looking and I was like, whoa, it's interdenominational, just like YWAM. And not only that, and yet it's Holy Spirit focused, like unapologetically Holy Spirit driven. And I kept looking, and then I noticed, I was like, whoa, and it's fastest growing in the Roman Catholic Church in North America. And I thought, wow, this thing is crazy. Like, the Spirit of God must be on this. And then I looked, I kept looking, and I was like, okay, it's free. No way, which is like a YWAMer's love language, right? And so I thought, wow, if there was a tool or a model that we could use, that everyone in YWAM could use, this seems like it would be it, or one of them, right? There, like, how many tools are like that tick every one of those boxes, right? And so I thought, okay, maybe this is worth trying out. And so my wife and I, we went to our church here in Kona, and we sat with the pastor because we had heard they had been doing Alpha. And we said, tell us about Alpha. And they said, we love Alpha. It's what we started using back in the 90s when our church first started. And they said, we attribute all the growth of our church to Alpha. And so I thought, wow, that's amazing. Can we try it? But I asked them, I said, you know, we want to actually, can we try it at our house? Knowing that if we're going to teach this to YWAMers, it might not always be in a traditional church. And so they said, sure. And I said, well, would you just point seekers or any non-believers that come, you know, across the church, like up to our house? So my wife and I, we thought, well, let's do it. Let's start this, right? Now, before I go any further, I want to share just a short video that gives you a better picture of what Alpha is. So let's watch that, and then I'll share with you how the Alpha went in our home.
Having conversations about life, faith, and Jesus is hard. And this is interesting because at some point, everyone wrestles with life's big questions. Questions about hope, purpose, meaning, and love. Imagine creating a space where people in our community, our friends, neighbors, and coworkers, can come and have conversations in a way that is authentic and unforced. Where leaders don't need to have all the answers, and anyone can ask tough questions and share honestly about what they believe. That's what Alpha is all about. Alpha started in a church in London years ago with a simple idea to engage friends who might not typically go to church. Lives were transformed, and it began to grow all over the world. Today, you can find Alpha in schools, coffee shops, church buildings, prisons, and homes. And so far, millions of people have experienced Alpha. So what is Alpha? Alpha is a series of interactive sessions exploring the basics of the Christian faith. In each session, you eat food, listen to a talk, and have discussions in small groups. Eating food together creates space for people to connect, relax, and build friendships. The talks tackle core questions about life and faith from a Christian perspective. And the discussion allows people to unpack these ideas without fear of being corrected or judged. All of this is done in a fun environment where anyone is welcome. There are 3 main sets of talks you could use: the Alpha Film Series, Alpha with Nikki Gumbel, and the Alpha Youth Series. Each is designed with a different audience in mind and is typically run over 8 to 12 weeks, with a weekend away where there are opportunities to experience worship through music and moments for prayer. Alpha also comes with everything you need to empower others to be involved, like discussion guides and training videos for you and your team. And all the talks and tools are available online and can be downloaded for free. By running Alpha, you're creating a space where people can connect with each other and connect with God. Sign up, get started, run Alpha today.
All right, so as you can tell, there's 3 things you do when you do an Alpha for about 8 to 12 weeks. You have a meal, you watch a video, and then you have a discussion about that video. The videos range in topics from, is there more to life than this? Who is Jesus? Why did he die? Why and how should I read my Bible? Why and how should I pray? Who is the Holy Spirit? How can I get guidance from the Spirit? How can I be filled with the Spirit? What is spiritual warfare? how do I share my faith, and what is the church? So you can see it's a pretty good foundation when you do the whole series. Now, I love John Mark Comer. He's a pastor, an author, and he put it this way. He said, he says, what I love about Alpha is that it's not really a formula. It's just community around a table with the gospel of Jesus and an openness to the Holy Spirit. I love that. It's just simple riverbanks that we all need, to help us bring together community centered around following Jesus. All right, so back to my wife and I. So we decided, all right, we're going to start our Alpha on this particular night, and we're going to have this group. I think it started with about 6 people, or 6 to 8 people that came over. And so my wife, she's really good at hospitality. She went all out, made a great meal. The group came. It was a eclectic group in terms of their faith. And, we had the meal together. And that was great. Then we went into our living room. We all sat down. I pushed play. We watched the first video. And then, we had a discussion about it. And the first night went pretty good. I was curious, will they come back the next week? And sure enough, they did. And they kept coming back over and over again. And, what I loved about this, we finished the Alpha. Not only did we see lives transformed and affected in it, but when we came to the end, we said, you know what, guys? Hey, the Alpha's almost done. And they said, no. And they're like, oh, we want to keep going. And that, to me, was one of the greatest wins. Why? Because they wanted to stay in community and continue to try to follow Jesus together. And to me, I was like, man, if we could see that happen all over the world, right? Where we don't just lead people to the Lord, but we lead them into community that keeps going, that's a win. If I were to give you an analogy, I brought a little prop here. So let me get it set up. So if you remember back to chemistry class, right? They talked about this thing called a catalyst. So a catalyst, I better put my safety goggles on. A catalyst in chemistry is something that you can put in, to a different mixture. And when it goes in, it starts a reaction. But the true catalyst is unique because, or what makes a catalyst unique is that when you take it out, the reaction keeps going, right? And so Alpha to me is a catalyst, right? It's only 8 to 12 weeks. And when you put it into a community, and then when you take it out, it can keep going. You see that? And that's what I love about Alpha. To me, that's why it's such a huge win. All right. So, continued to practice Alpha here in Hawaii. We helped with one at our church again, and then we helped co-lead one. I actually led one online during the COVID days with about 60 people online. And we continued to see people changed, right? And even want to continue in community. And so we started thinking to ourselves, all right, can we bring this into YWAM? What would that look like if we were to start training YWAMers like yourself in Alpha? And at first, I'll be honest, at face value, we thought, it won't work. It can't work. You guys go primarily on 2-month, sometimes 3-month outreaches. We're a short-term mission agency, so we won't have time to lead the Alphas there. By the time we get there, by the time we set it up, invite people to it, we won't have time to do the 8 to 12 weeks. But then as I continued to have conversations with Alpha about this, we thought together, we were like, wait a second. What if that actually benefited us? Us not leading it. What if we actually went on outreach and rather than us lead the Alpha, what if we taught local Christians to lead the Alpha? So that when we leave, the Alpha keeps going. And we thought, maybe there's something to that. And so in partnership with Alpha, we started to come together with a simple model, hashtag Alpha on Outreach, I call it, that we can inject into an outreach team or equip you with to have on your tool belt so that you can empower locals to have this and leave communities that can keep going, right? So let me tell you what the model is here. So it starts in your lecture phase. So once you find out what your outreach location is, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to reach out to your contact in that nation. And you're going to tell them, hey, one of the tools we have that our outreach team is coming with is this thing called Alpha. Now, if they've never heard about it, you're just going to explain it to them, and you can probably even find a video on YouTube that's in their language that's like a promo video of it. And you could say, hey, could we teach some of your leaders how to host this? We don't want to lead it, we want you to lead it. And what we'll do is we will point people to it. And so here during your lecture phase, you're trying to get a thumbs up of yes, we want an Alpha. And then the next thing you're trying to seek is actually like a starting date. So ideally, you would try to do this 2 to 3 weeks into your outreach. So it gives you time to train your local leaders, but also time for your team to go and invite people to it, right? So again, we're in our lecture phase. You're going to reach out to your contacts, and you're going to try to find a group of Christians that are saying, yes, we want Alpha. And then if they say yes, you're going to try to lock in a date, a start date. So let's say Friday night, January 30th, all right? So now your team knows, hey, on January 30th, we're going to start an Alpha on outreach in this nation that we're going to, right? All right, next step. We train your team. That's what we're doing with you guys right now. We train you to coach these local leaders on how to run a successful Alpha. Moving forward, you guys eventually leave on outreach. So you go on outreach and you land in your nation, or maybe you're driving there or however you're getting there. And once you get there, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to go to that church or that group of Christians, maybe it's a group of YWAMers, and you're going to go to them and you're going to try to identify a few leaders to run this Alpha that you can teach, that you can empower and equip to lead this upcoming Alpha. And we're going to talk more about that in the next session of what you're actually going to teach them. But then following that, during those weeks up until January 30th or whenever your Alpha is going to start, you're going to do what we do best as YWAMers. We're just going to go out in faith and meet people. This is where it's not going to change your outreach. You're going to go and evangelize. You're going to go try to find people, who are curious about Jesus. But now you have a place to point them, right? And you're going to point them and you're going to say, hey, you seem curious about Jesus. You should come to Alpha on January 30th. We're going to have a meal. We're going to talk about Jesus with other people similar to you. Then the Alpha will start. You guys will still be there most likely when the Alpha starts. But again, you're not going to lead it. You're just going to be present. And the first few Alphas, you'll just help and assist. And then eventually you're going to leave. But the coolest thing is this. Your Alpha is going to keep going. And you're going to go back, and you're going to fly back to wherever your base is or your home, knowing that, wow, we left a group of people that are continuing to try to follow Jesus. And ultimately, to be honest, can become a church, possibly even, if there's no church in that region, or if it's connected to a church, bless the socks off of that church. Amen? So what's cool is we started trying this. And this is where I get excited. So we started just testing this, going, all right, let's teach a few teams how to do this. And we started to see it work. We started to see it work in places like Mexico, in Albania, in Cambodia, in the Dominican Republic, in Panama, in the US, in South Africa. And so we thought, all right, maybe there's something to this, right? So, all right, we're going to take another time out. Now that you've heard this model, I want to actually give you some time right now I'm assuming you guys already have your contacts of where you're going on outreach. And I just want to give you 15 minutes. Maybe it's the outreach leaders. I want you to reach out to your contacts and just say, hey, our team is going to have this. Would you be interested? Because I know how DTS is. It can be very busy, so I just want to give you a minute to do that. Now, students, if your staff are doing this, I want you to plan in the coming 2 weeks, I want you to plan 2 times that you can practice Alpha together. So what you're going to do is you're going to think of, like, maybe it's Friday night this week or in a coming week, and all you're going to do is you're going to have a meal together, you're going to watch one of the Alpha videos, and you're going to talk about it. Just get a feel for it before our next training session. Does that sound doable? Yeah. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, staff, I want you to reach out to your contacts, and students and staff, you can join in on this. I want you to plan on practicing at least once, preferably twice in the coming weeks, just over a mealtime, probably dinner, I'm assuming. Sound good? All right, let's do that. All right, so you guys know your homework for the next 2 weeks. I just want to close this first session watching a video that I believe gives a picture of the potential of what Alpha can do on outreach. Does that sound good? So let's watch this.
My name is Brother Jason Vergara from the Light of Jesus Family, a Catholic charismatic community here in the Philippines. I am a missionary of our community, so I started serving in this community way back 5 years ago. We were the first one to use Alpha here in Cebu, here in Barili. Kuya Bogs told me, Jason, if you will try Alpha, believe me, everybody will do it. So that's what happened right now. There's a lot of leaders right now who are trying Alpha, especially in Cebu City area and even in the Mindanao. January 2020, we started a small group here, but pandemic strikes. I've seen a lot of people who lost their hope and they're struggling because of the pandemic. So it seems God revealed it to me, Jason, you have to do something because everybody is running empty. So you have to do something that will inspire them, to motivate them to live again and to hope again. So I gave it a try again, the Alpha. So I started with 7 people. Sa Purok Biyernes. So mga mahigit 2 oras yung lakad natin. So nakatulog naman. Tara! We don't have enough luxury of venue here, so we just use any place that is available, especially under the mango tree or any kind of tree. So as long as we're safe there, so we started there. It was really amazing because from 7 people, from one group, we were able to establish 6 groups after 3 months. And after 6 months, from 6 groups, we were able to establish 12 groups. So one of our strategy is not just to bring the word, but to look for leaders. Because I've realized if you will not be intentional of looking for leaders, you cannot expand. The journey was not easy. It seems that God is cooking something. So that struggle was like an ingredient for more success, for more let's say, more people to come and join Alpha. So, for a year, I was able to establish 66 Alpha group. And we are in the 2nd year right now. So right now, we have 70 groups of Alpha as of the moment and counting. And Alpha is the missing ingredients, especially to our community. When Alpha came to the scene in our community, it's like a bomb, a nuclear, atomic bomb to our community because we grow, and we expand. And I guess the exact word why I'm doing this is out of compassion. So I've seen a lot of young people right now who are lost and they don't know what to do and they don't know their purpose. And I always remind them during the course that your purpose in life is to love God and to serve God. Only in Christ that you will fulfill your true potential. And also, it is not enough to know Christ. We must bring Him to others.